Welcome, everybody. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're here on the ancestral, unceded, and traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I know many of you are on the land of other nations, so feel free to put those nation names in the chat. And always let us remember our connection to our siblings in these nations and work and pray for the day in which we might be together in right relationship. Well, welcome to this seventh installment of Interfaith Educator Harold Rosen's Justice Exploring its Global Development. And today we're going to look at global understandings of justice. And I'm going to turn it over to Harold.
Okay. The global and future views of justice and world order are next time, 2 weeks. This time we're looking at a Baha'i perspective.
Baha'i
Uh,
perspective, yeah.
Let me introduce this in an interesting way, I think. Most people recognize that Judaism and Christianity are sister faiths. Sister faiths. In other words, lots of obvious family resemblances. And that's why, the Bible, has a Hebrew part and a Christian part. Most people, when they think of Hinduism and Buddhism, they also say, okay, those are sister faiths. There's a lot of family resemblance. And when it comes to the Islam and the Baha'i faith, again, there are some family resemblances. In fact, before I studied the Baha'i faith directly, I had a sense that it was sort of a new and improved Islam. That was the phrase I used in my head to understand the Baha'i faith. Then the more I studied it, I started to see, oh, it's another world religion, distinct from Islam. But I think so. All the major religions look like they're a reform movement from a previous tradition to some extent. Zoroastrianism is interesting because it has family resemblances with Hinduism on one side and Buddhism, those two on one side, and also some family resemblances with Judaism and Christianity. People who look at Zoroastrianism see that. So, in other words, the religions come at a certain time and in a certain place, and therefore they bear the cultural historical marks of their birth. So the Baha'i faith grew out of an Islamic context in Iran in the middle of the 19th century. So page 1 is like an introduction to the Baha'i faith, and I try to keep my approach very objective, and I'm not going to defend anything in this. Some of you have Baha'i connections. You can jump in at any time. Also, Baha'is are supposed to say that we don't have official interpretive power. We have individual interpretation, but we can't speak in an authoritative way about the Baha'i faith. Only the Universal House of Justice can. So it's important to qualify that. So I'm sharing with you my understanding of the Baha'i faith. I mentioned the founder, Baha'u'llah, a name which means a title meaning glory of God. Middle of the 19th century in Iran is when it began. Baha'is consider him a divine educator or a manifestation of God. And they say Baha'u'llah has the same status as, say, Jesus or Muhammad or Buddha or Moses. The theme of the Baha'i faith is unity, world unity. The principles and teachings we'll look at on one of the later sections. The highest authority today for Baha'is is the Universal House of Justice on Mount Carmel in modern Israel. Also, the Baha'i faith is aiming toward what could be called a commonwealth of nations. The teaching is humanity's evolving. We have evolved over the ages and will continue to, and eventually the world will be united under something like a commonwealth of nations that'll have perhaps a federal structure. In other words, executive, legislative, judicial functions that operate at maybe 4 levels: local, national, regional, and global. Okay, I put some of the memorable one-liners that are associated with the Baha'i faith. Let your vision be world-embracing rather than confined to your own self. And one of my favorites is consort with the followers of all religions in a spirit of friendliness and fellowship. The Baha'i faith basically is saying that the same one God is behind all the religions. And, when I saw that, I thought, oh, this explains why there are family resemblances among all the religions, a common source, why we have way more than the golden rule, which is in common to all the religions, but a great deal more. For example, teachings about justice and love and compassion, unity, peace, responsibility, service, all of those, forgiveness as well, are in the Baha'i writings as well as in the writings of other faiths. At least this is my interpretation, that I can see a common source for the world's religions. I gave a timeline that's sort of built around the five figures that are important in the history of the Baha'i faith. The Bab was the forerunner of Baha'u'llah. The Bab means the gate or the gate of God, and had a role in the Baha'i faith similar to John the Baptist in Christianity, a forerunner preparing the way for Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah is considered the founder. The son of Baha'u'llah is Abdul Baha. Baha'is call him the exemplar, or the 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 servant of Baha. That's what Abdul Baha means, servant of glory. And then the grandson of Abdul Baha is a figure, Shoghi Effendi, who Baha'is called the guardian. In a sense, he was the architect of the administrative order of the Baha'i faith. So the Baha'i faith is less than 200 years old. And, it's interesting. In the middle of the 19th century, I think a lot of people in the world, especially in Western nations, thought, well, we've outgrown religion. Religion is a thing of the past. It has some good gems in it, but we don't need it anymore because we've come of age. We're now rational beings. I think a lot of people thought that way. And then here comes another world religion that has some family resemblances with all the other ones and lifts up universal principles, but then applies it to a new world situation, meaning globally. The Baha'i faith is directed to a global context. Okay, now, bottom of page 2, I mentioned that justice in particular is very important in the Baha'i faith. It's sort of like a meta virtue. That's my term for a virtue that includes a lot of other virtues. I think love is that way too. There are some virtues that seem to me like higher in the pantheon of virtues. And I would say love, unity, peace, justice are among those very powerful virtues. So in the Baha'i writings, it talks a lot about justice in response to the opposite of justice, like tyranny or oppression, corruption, prejudice. We don't start to understand how important justice is until we sort of wallow in the problems of humanity. The fact that we are prejudiced, that corruption starts to affect, our administration at all levels, that there's tyranny, that rulers sometimes get carried away with their role. So there is this value or virtue of justice that's very important, especially in the Baha'i faith. Okay, I'm looking at page 3, and it was fascinating to me to see how the definition of justice is almost beyond human scope in terms of Baha'i writings. It's correlated with a lot of other things. So I try to list what justice is correlated with at the top of page 3 from a Baha'i point of view. I picked out 12 things that come up whenever justice is being described in the Baha'i faith: equity, moderation, righteousness, impartiality, compassion, counsel, wisdom, fairness, balance, advancement, beauty. That one surprised me the most, and universality. So if you study all the places where justice is discussed in Baha'i writings, you'll find these other virtues right around it. So it's like a constellation. I find that fascinating. So in other words, we're not supposed to fully grasp justice. It's something, it's like a divine attribute that we can grow in our understanding of. Okay, middle of page 3, I list the principles of the Baha'i faith. There's 14 of them there. I just want to mention the first 3 and then 2 near the bottom. The first 3 that are listed officially, in Baha'i writings are independent search after truth. Everyone is supposed to do that, independently search. We can learn from others, but we have to use our own reason and experience. Secondly, the oneness of the entire human race. We're essentially one. We have something like a soul and a mind that relates us to different levels of reality. And the third one, the basic unity of all religions, having come from the same ultimate source. And then I underlined the institution of a world tribunal. That's a major teaching of the Baha'i faith, that there should be a court that has global jurisdiction. Someday, the humanity should set this up, a world tribunal that will decide, for example, like in the issue between Ukraine and Russia, who's right, and make a decision so that war would be unnecessary. So that's one thing a world tribunal would do, is outlaw war and make decisions by reasonable means. Okay, and then justice as the ruling principle of society. So that's showing how important justice is. All of society should be patterned after a growing understanding of justice. Okay, and then I have several sections of quotations from Baha'u'llah and his successor, Abdul Baha, and Shoghi Effendi, the administrator of the Baha'i faith, or the builder of the administrative order, I should say. Some quotes, and we won't look at all of them, but I want to show you some of them. So I'm looking at the bottom of page 3, and these are some one-liners from Baha'u'llah on justice. Safeguard the rights of the downtrodden and punish the wrongdoers. If thine eyes be turned toward justice, choose thou for thy neighbor that which thou choosest for thyself. That should sound very familiar. That's, again, the golden rule. Be an upholder and defender of the victim of oppression. Let integrity and uprightness distinguish all thine acts. The one at the bottom of page 3 says, should anyone among you, rulers, just talking to rulers here, should anyone among you take up arms against another, rise ye all against him, for this is naught but manifest justice. So that's the principle of collective security. So all the nations of the world should prevent an aggressor from invading another nation. If that were the rule, then there would be no war. It would be halted in its tracks, and the issue that led to the aggression would be decided by a world tribunal. Okay, so the Baha'i faith is very focused on world order and justice. I have on page 4, I'm going through this rather quick. I want to get through 5 pages out of 10 and stop, and then see what your comments and questions might be. So this is, to me, utterly interesting. The top of page 5 says, it summarizes Baha'u'llah's message to world rulers. Remember, this is the middle of the 19th century. So Baha'u'llah, who was a prisoner officially, was writing letters to the rulers of what we call the great powers today. So he wrote to Queen Victoria and Tsar Alexander II, Pope Pius IX, Napoleon III, William I of Germany, Prussia, Francis Joseph of Austria, the Shah of Iran, and the Sultan of Ottoman Turkey, as well as the rulers of the American republics. So these are substantive letters that was basically saying, and I summarize what he was saying in the second paragraph on page 4. Examine the cause, this new cause of world unity. Um, Reconcile your differences, reduce armaments, make collective security pacts, restrain oppressors, deal equitably with your citizens, demonstrate justice to humanity, eliminate slavery, establish representative government, sell your immoderate ornamentation and expend righteously. Put your trust in God rather than your treasuries and armies, and summon the nations unto God. Wow, imagine you're a ruler of, say, France, and you get a letter like this. You know, almost needless to say, everyone rejected what the Baha'u'llah was saying. The only one that paid the slightest bit of respect was Queen Victoria. She said something like, "If this is of God, it will it will." Does somebody know that direct quote?
I think it will prosper.
It will prosper.
It
Yeah.
shall endure.
Ah, that's it.
Oh, endure.
It shall
yeah.
endure. If not, it can do no harm. So that's showing a tiny bit of respect. Anyway, so her kingdom endured. We still have royalty, in England, but the other kingdoms started to fall. So yeah, it looked like this was not just a good idea from a wise man in a prison, but perhaps had divine sanction behind it. Okay. In the middle of page 4, I mentioned Abdu'l-Baha. You know, it's interesting. I find him easier to understand. Abdu'l-Baha was an interpreter of the Baha'i faith, and his writings are considered scriptural. But he turned toward the West, just like Paul, took the Christian message to the West. Abdu'l-Baha visited the United States and Europe and did a lot of speaking. And so the Baha'i faith was sort of interpreted for Western use, you might say. So some of his writings seem very relevant, right, to the Western world. So in the middle of page 4, I'm reading one quote here, and then maybe I'll ask Baxter. Can you read "In the Eye of the Creator"? Do you have that page 4 with you?
I'm sorry, Harold, I'm on a different computer today.
Oh, okay,
and
I
all
won't
my
bug you.
documents are elsewhere. Sorry.
All right, all right.
I can read it.
Okay, Bill, please.
In the eye of the Creator, all his children are equal. His goodness is poured forth on all. He does not favor this nation nor that nation. All alike are his creatures. This being so, why should we make division separating one race from another? Why should we create barriers of superstition and tradition, bringing discord and hatred? All men are of one family. The crown of humanity rests upon the head of every human being.
Okay. See, Abdu'l-Baha said that in Paris. Look at this next quote, also in Paris. Justice is not limited. It is a universal quality. Its operation must be carried out in all classes, from the highest to the lowest. Justice must be sacred, and the rights of all people must be considered. Desire for others only that which you desire for yourselves. Again, that probably sounds quite familiar. That's a form of the golden rule. Then shall we rejoice in the sun of justice, which shines from the horizon of God. Okay, and now Shoghi Effendi, he was the grandson of Abdu'l-Baha, the successor. And look at what he says right near the bottom. A world federal system ruling the whole earth and exercising unchallengeable authority over its unimaginably vast resources, blending and embodying the ideals of both East and West, liberated from the curse of war, a system in which force is made the servant of justice, such is the goal towards which humanity, impelled by the unifying forces of life, is moving. Okay, so lots of statements about the future of humanity and the importance of global governance in various forms. Then I have a section on the Universal House of Justice, the currently the supreme administrative body of the Baha'i faith that's seated on Mount Carmel in the Holy Land. That's where Baha'u'llah was exiled, you know, for the last 24 years of his life, up until he ascended. That's the way Baha'is talk about his death, ascension, in 1892. So there's two arms of the administrative order, an elected arm that works at the national or the local and the national and the international level, and then an arm that's called the learned advisors, or they have no legal power except they're just respected. So they're people that help us understand divine guidance, but the decision makers make their own decision, having reflected on the guidance that they get from the learned advisors. Okay, I find that a fascinating system of governance, presently making up the Baha'i world order. I'm going to mention only one more section and then stop and see what your comments and questions and observations might be. Section 9, middle of page 5, I call it Oneness of Humanity and Religion, Implications for Justice. It usually takes people a while to understand what this unity or oneness is about, but the idea that God is one, that means in spite of all the different language we use for God, we might call God the ultimate reality or the unknown or Allah or Brahman, Atman, or the Tao, many phrases, or the absolute, right? There could be many phrases that sort of refer to the divine realm. And so the Baha'i faith is claiming all those names point to one reality that's beyond our complete comprehension, but we get glimpses of it from the writings of prophets or divine educators. So, okay, God is one. Humanity is one. Oh, that means in spite of all the linguistic differences, the cultural differences, racial differences, humanity is essentially one, meaning our highest attribute, our mind or soul, is quite in common, despite other kinds of differences. That means essentially we can understand each other and we have a similar station, higher than the earth, you might say, but lower than the divine realm. Okay, and then unity of religion. Maybe that's the hardest one of all to explain, except if you accept this hypothesis that it has the same source. Religion in its pure form or original form comes from ultimate reality or the creator. And it comes in a form that's relevant to a certain place and a certain time. So it speaks through Zoroaster in ancient Persia. It speaks through Jesus Christ, in the Eastern Mediterranean area at a certain time. It speaks through Buddha in northern India. It spoke through Baha'u'llah, Baha'is would say, in Persia in the middle of the 19th century. So there's a specificity to religion that makes it look like it's different, but a common source that really says all religions are chapters in the same book or links in the same chain. Religion is essentially one. Okay, those are Baha'i teachings about unity. And I believe that collectively it provides a paradigm, you might say, a new paradigm for understanding religion as a whole and also history as a whole. Because if these prophets or founders of religions generate not only a religion, but a new civilization, it gives us a way to understand history. History is the story of civilizations that are somehow trying to express divine guidance and implement it through its various institutions. Okay, so far, any comments, observations, different ways of putting it? I might have even made a mistake or two. Okay, Baxter.
Thank you, Harold. I just wanted to mention that the Baha'u'llah made one mention of justice very specifically, which indicates, this is my understanding anyway, indicates its importance to us. He says, "O Son of Spirit, the best beloved of all things, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom if thou desirest me, and neglect it not, that I may confide in thee. By its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge, and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behoveth thee to be. Verily, justice is my gift to thee, and the sign of my loving kindness. Set it then before thine eyes." And to me, the salient point there is that he says the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice.
So the highest authority right now is not called the universal house of love, or the universal house of mercy, or the universal house of forgiveness, or the universal house of service, but the universal house of justice, conveying how important that is, especially in the global context. And I also, that quote you just shared, Baxter, it emphasizes seeing things through our own eyes. Oh my goodness. So in other words, reevaluating, independently investigating. And later on, I'm going to mention consultation as part of Baha'i teaching. So if everyone looks through their own eyes and then consults about what they see or what they understand, and consults divine guidance on some issue, that they're more likely to come to a just conclusion of some kind. Okay, yeah. Any other observation? Please, Bill. Yeah.
Yeah, I was glad that Baxter read that quote because I was thinking of it also. Just a slightly additional way that I think of it. It's part of the hidden words, which I always read as a message to me, to an individual. And it's interesting to me that Baha'u'llah is saying that you have a role in justice, in that you are, the basing building blocks of society. And your concept of justice, which is really built out of learning to independently investigate things, is a very important part, not just of society, but for your own spiritual well-being. It's it's always remarkable to me that it transfers that concept of justice down to a very individual level, and that you shouldn't just think about it as a part of governance or a function of governance.
So, Bill, your comment reminds me of something I skipped over at the bottom of page 2. I just want to mention Jack McLean was looking at justice, and he said in the Baha'i writing, it seems to address 4 different levels. He says comprehensive justice is in other words, it's an attribute of God. So it's a quality that in a way permeates the universe. That's one level. The justice of God in the world, second level. So justice is a world shaping force, right, that we can use to understand what's happened to humanity. Then at another level, social justice, there are specific laws surrounding us, and justice shapes them. Then he says the individual justice also, that's what you're emphasizing. He says on the personal level, justice is described as rectitude of conduct by the guardian or Shoghi Effendi. So yeah, justice has levels, right? Individual is part of the social order, as part of the shaping of humanity's story on earth, even as an attribute of the divine, right? So my goodness. Okay, justice has many levels. This is what I
Isn't it?
find humbling about it. I don't think you can come up with a specific one-liner definition of justice from the Baha'i writings that apply to all cases. It looks very multifaceted to me. Please, Nivi, I mean Tani. Yes, Tani.
Yeah, I'm going to try to ask my question without coughing, so pardon me if I end up breaking out. Yeah, two questions. One is, are there any examples of the kind of justice that Baha'u'llah envisions? Are there any examples of how he metes out justice in his own lifetime or our current institutions, how they are dealing with justice issues? Are there examples of that?
Okay, quickly. Oh my goodness. I suppose if I knew Baha'i history wonderfully well, I could give examples of Baha'u'llah dispensing justice. But you know what's more obvious to me is Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi generated an administrative order that is supposed to be a nucleus of a just world order. So the Universal House of Justice, the use of consultation is justice in action, right? So the nine-member body of the Universal House of Justice are sort of enacting a procedure of justice as all the time. And so are national assemblies administering justice of a type, making decisions, discerning
Yeah, and
the
I
truth.
guess,
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
and the way that, and I was thinking also, the one example I can think of is that when we elect our institutions, our local assemblies or our national assemblies, that when all attributes of the candidates or the potential elector are equal, that we are supposed to vote for the member of the minority in order to be able to raise them up. So that's for
Absolutely.
me one
Yeah.
example. Um, and then the other question I had for you, it's very strong, the language about using force to implement justice. But in the context of we are reaching the age of maturity, and force seems to be an element, a method of our childhood. And so as much as, you know, like a police force and you want justice to happen, but in the spirit of like the transformation of humanity, the transformation of their thinking, when would justice be applied by force, and when would it be, you know, done through reasoning and you know, is there a criteria of when force would be needed?
You know, here's my understanding of this. Where humanity is now trying to develop what the Baha'i writings call the lesser peace, the lesser peace. And that will be a time, as my understanding of the lesser peace will be, we have a world order that was formed by political means that observes collective security, so that if there's an aggressor nation by force, it would be stopped by the rest of the nation. So, but the lesser peace is not the greater peace. I think you're describing another stage of human evolution. There will come a time when divine guidance or virtue is completely incarnated in everybody. We won't need to use force to solve problems. I think that so it looks to me like the Baha'i writings are saying we have a lot of evolving still to do. That of course we should resolve everything by consultation to the extent possible, but at the international level, where you have aggressor nations with mighty strong weapons, that force still needs to be used up until the time when we form a truly an operative world government. We don't have one yet. We have a United Nations. That's a glorious name, but
Mhm.
it still, doesn't solve force problems or military problems. It
Okay,
tries
so
to
maybe at
persuade.
the larger levels.
Yeah, right. So at the collective
Macro
level,
levels.
I think the Baha'i writings are saying we're going to have force as a servant of justice up until we have this thing called the lesser peace. Beyond that, who knows how many centuries beyond that, we will evolve beyond the need for force, because that's the most great peace. We will have internalized, virtue, and won't need it. At least that's my understanding. It gets way beyond our pay grade to look into the distant future. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if Bill or Baxter are aware of this quote, but I remember somewhere it's in the writings, it says that the character of people will be so refined in the future that they won't even consider committing a crime because
Yeah.
they'll have a stronger conscience. The implication was they'll have a stronger conscience, and they will want so much to have the blessings of God, and be known for being virtuous, that it won't even enter their mind to commit crimes. So then we won't need to, hopefully that kind of attitude will ripple all through society, so that we won't ever have to actually get to the point of implementing force.
That's all very true, I think. So some people are that way already, right? Some people, can't imagine themselves using force, right, to solve problems. They're going to use persuasion and reason and love and compassion and service. But I think Baha'u'llah is talking about the collective world order, that we haven't grown beyond the need for force, and we haven't attained the lesser peace fully yet. We're we're involved in a number of warm-up exercises toward toward the lesser peace. For example, the European Union, or regional agreements to support one another. Even the UN came up with this principle called the right to protect. If there's some sort of violation of people in your neighboring country, a stronger country can step in and protect the weaker country, or the people being oppressed in the weaker country. So to some extent that's used. Anyway, it's evolutionary, it's my understanding. Please, Baxter, comment.
I'm sorry to be speaking up again so soon
That's
here.
all right. No, good.
I just I wanted to make a comment on, you were mentioning the oneness of humanity, and we often hear that phrase, but we don't, at least I don't think deeply about it. And it struck me when you were speaking about how interesting it is. Baha'u'llah always seems to go out of his way in his teachings to not abuse humanity of its instincts. Now, what I'm getting at is every nation on earth, every culture on earth, no matter how isolated or how far removed in time and place from all the others, they have one thing in common. It's part of the human psyche. We have to use words, a king. Under the king, you have an advisor who has no authority but to advise. Under those two, you have representatives of the king's authority who are intended to represent the king's authority, no more, no less. And under that, you have the populace. And you see with the Universal House of Justice, the institution of the guardianship, and then with the national spiritual assemblies and local spiritual assemblies, you see exactly that human instinct is not being abused here. It is being used to the highest order. I find that interesting, that Baha'u'llah builds on what is basic and foundational in the human psyche.
So it's as if we're building heaven on earth using human material, right? Human material, right? Yeah, that's an interesting insight. Okay, other comments so far? Questions, observations, different ways of putting it? Please, Bill. Yeah.
I just had, going back to what you mentioned earlier, those what was it, Four Levels of Justice by Jack
Jack McLean,
McLean?
yes. Bottom of page
McLean?
2. Yeah.
Oh, page 2.
Yeah,
Okay,
bottom of page 2.
page 2. Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, briefly, I'm now at the bottom of page 5, and there's a unit there. I have 3 levels of law. You know, because of this course, I've been forced to look at how law is conceived. And to me, it looks like the Baha'i writings are confirming levels of law that have been talked about earlier, you know, in humanity's history. So divine law is guidance through these prophets or divine educators or manifestations. Human law, rules formulated by humanity down through the ages in response to prophets. At least that's what this is the pattern this course is sort of based on. That if we track all human laws, they seem to have had an original divine origin. We may have distorted them, but it looks like that's where they came from. So there's a human attempt to formulate law. And then natural law, oh, the patterns discovered by science that provide order from the micro to the macro levels of physical reality. So law, that word is sort of borrowed from the civic context and applied to the natural order, as if to say, well, there seems to be something like laws about the physical world. Science is designed to discover them, to find greater and greater patterns of order. Okay, it looks like the Baha'i writings are confirming that type of interpretation, that there's at least those 3 levels of law. And at the bottom of page 5 and on to page 6, it's mentioned that there are 2 kinds of ordinances in religions. One kind could be called universal religious ordinances. And those, as I understand it, amount to the virtues. So it's a law, love is a law. Forgiveness is a law. Mercy is a law. Peace is a law. Unity is a law. Responsibility is a law, a moral law. So that's one kind. The universal moral spiritual principles are in common to all the religions. And then each religion varies and has distinctive material guidance. I would think, for example, in the Baha'i faith, we have laws about certain holy days, right, that are distinct to the Baha'i dispensation, which and will be replaced or abrogated in a future religion. So in other words, the founders of each religion can take previous laws and abrogate them and replace them with other ones. You know, Jesus did this with Judaism. Muhammad did this with both Christian and Jewish teachings. Buddha did this with Hindu teachings. So there are unique guidelines in each faith, which the Baha'i faith is saying those are about the material affairs of mankind, and they will change with future dispensations. What stays in common is this moral spiritual guidance, like the Golden Rule, like the necessity to love, the necessity to take responsibility, the necessity to be of service, the necessity to cooperate, and that sort of thing. Okay. It's mentioned that there's 4 primary purposes of moral and spiritual law in the writings. It says to bring tranquility to human society, to raise the standard of human behavior. I'm on page 6 there at the top. To increase the range of human understanding and to spiritualize the life of each person and society as a whole. These are mentioned in the introduction to the Most Holy Book, or the Kitab-i-Aqdas, as it's called. Baha'u'llah's Book of Laws that has 190 paragraphs. Okay, and then that book that I'm describing is in section 13, the middle of page 6. It's quite stunning to me that this book of law is only 190 paragraphs. So, in other words, a framework of law is given for this whole dispensation of the Baha'i faith, which is supposed to last 1,000 years or more, is in 190 paragraphs. And a lot of those paragraphs are what could be called moral spiritual guidance or encouragement it's not specifically laws, but it's sort of guidance about the importance of law, the necessity of law, the station of law, where it comes from. You might say the metaphysics and theology behind the law. A lot of those 190 paragraphs deal with that. But The Guardian summarized the book with that quote I have in the middle of page 6. It prescribes obligatory prayers, abolishes the institution of priesthood, it prohibits slavery, asceticism, mendicancy or begging, monasticism, prescribes monogamy, condemns backbiting, the use of opium, intoxicating drinks. It specifies punishments for murder, arson, adultery, theft. So in all those respects, it sounds like law as commonly known, right? So a lot of other traditions, forbid those same things. But what I find very distinctive about Baha'i law is it's putting a completely different frame around it. Baha'u'llah put it this way. He says, I haven't revealed to you a mere code of laws, not a mere code of laws, but the choice wine. That's sort of a spiritual symbol of, getting to the banquet of God. It's a very lofty concept of law. And I can't say that I've wrapped my head around it. I think it's almost beyond, our human pay grade to fully understand law and justice. But we're getting way more insight about it, I believe, in the Baha'i writings. I mention human rights, and I notice in Baha'i writings, every time rights are mentioned, duties are also mentioned, right? So it's not only rights, but it's responsibilities that go along with those rights. And those are developed very well by a guy named Peter Smith, who wrote an encyclopedia of the Baha'i faith, a concise encyclopedia, and has an excellent article on human rights and the different levels of human rights. Also, the Massey lectures, to just give it a Canadian context, Payam Akavan, I'm on page 7 near the top. Payam Akavan worked for the World Court and is a Baha'i, and wrote and gave these Massey lectures that were given the title In Search of a Better World, a Human Rights Odyssey. So that's a very well-developed set of talks on human rights and duties from someone that's worked at the global level. Just I wanted to make that of it known to you. Payam Akavan, the Massey Lectures of 2017, are quite an interesting book about justice at the global level. I have a section here on socioeconomic development. The Baha'i faith, like all other religions, is supposed to do social action, right? To address the social and economic disparities and injustices in the world. All religions are taught to do this, every single one of them, Baha'i faith included. Down 2/3 of the way of page 7, I mentioned consultative problem solving. And I broke it up into steps, and this is not official. This is my understanding of what consultation involves. Calling upon divine assistance, step 1. Clarifying or defining issues to be addressed, step 2. Third, establishing relevant knowledge on the matter at hand. 4, identifying applicable moral spiritual guidance. What do the writings say about it, for example? And then 5th, this is the hard one. Conduct a full, frank, and courteous discussion, expressive of, but detached from, personal views. Oh my goodness, is that hard? For example, when I was a Unitarian minister, I would go to a meeting, and the way I would get ready for the meeting is I would figure out how I would persuade everybody to my point of view. That would be my way of getting ready for the meeting. I think a lot of people go to meetings that way. Now, this is saying go to the meeting with a different attitude. You're supposed to express your understanding of truth as you understand it, and then become completely detached after your mouth has uttered your point of view and turn into a listener. Right? So a frank, full, courteous discussion, expressive of but detached from personal views. Wow. Then you decide on a course of action, implement decisions, abide by the decisions faithfully and cooperatively, and revisit the issues if and when they arise anew. Wow, if only the world did that. If decisions were made that way at the international level or the regional, the national, the local, the family, wow, it'd be a better world. So it's saying use our reason, use our own judgment, but also be detached, which is one of those virtues, detachment, stepping aside and being receptive. Okay, I mentioned that Baha'is are asked to abstain from partisan political activity. Wow, and that's a difficult one to interpret, but I understand it to mean Baha'is are supposed to care very deeply about what's going on in the world. We're supposed to promote certain principles that are high-minded, but we're supposed to avoid party and personal mention, not mentioning individuals and not aligning with parties, but trying to solve problems at the level of principle. So contributing at the level of principle to the solution of the world's problems. Difficult thing to do. So it's being political, but not in a partisan way. If by political we mean concerned about the state of the world and order and its justice and its laws. All right, easier said than done. On page 8, I mentioned something the House of Justice said recently, relatively recently, about the state of the world. And I list some things there that are considered problems and then a good response or a Baha'i response. For example, engage with previously antagonistic groups. That's the problem, antagonistic groups, helping them to find unity through a common goal. Okay. Put aside inherited attitudes belonging to humanity's adolescence and overcome prejudices. View matters, guard against viewing matters with cynicism and sustain an eager and constructive outlook. Overcome gender inequality and injustice by putting the equality of women and men into practice. Cast off inertia and apathy through the exercise of individual initiative. Rise above feelings of personal preference, giving higher priority to plans for collective action. Avoid the potentially enervating effects of modern technologies. Wow, avoid those enervating effects, harnessing their constructive powers. Transcend worldly interests by prizing the sweetness of teaching and the joy of serving. Reject the opiate of consumerism, embracing opportunities for cooperation and service, and turn away from materialist ideologies and the worldviews they promote, fixing one's gaze on the laws and principles of God. Okay, so that's just the taste of some recent guidance from the House of Justice about what to be attending to. I mentioned that there's something called constructive resilience in the Baha'i faith, and it's fascinating to me. If you think of ways of addressing injustice, one way to address injustice is militarily, right? You destroy the enemy. That's one way. Another way is adversarial politics, right? So you argue on the side of one party against another. Another is civil disobedience, as represented by figures like Gandhi, right, or Nelson Mandela. The Baha'i faith is saying something is an alternative to all of these methods, as I understand it. It's saying we should not use violent revolution or warfare. We should not use adversarial politics. We should not even use civil disobedience. What should we use? And it's called constructive resilience. My understanding of that is it's a very nuanced approach. It's saying you do declare something is unjust. You abide by the laws. You use persuasion. You use reason. You try to even love your enemies. This should sound familiar. So you're resilient, but you're admitting there is a problem and there's a better way of doing something about it. Okay, that's constructive resilience. So the Baha'is who are persecuted in Iran are taught to be constructively resilient. And I do think it's an interesting model to look at that. Michael Kohlberg has really written a lot about constructive resilience as a problem-solving method that's a little different than all the other responses to injustice, I think. Okay, near the end, I was talking a lot about pages 8, 9, 10. What does it mean? What kind of image of the future world order does the Baha'i faith propose? And you could call it a consultative global governance. Those three words to me are kind of magical. Consultative global governance. Wow, if only we had it. And there's actually more detail about that. And so some of that detail I supply in these last 3 pages. But let me just jump to, there's one other thing I want to say before looking at that. On the last page, I have something called Current and Future Developments, the lesser peace and the greater peace, the lesser peace and the greater peace. Wendy Moman is a Baha'i scholar who has written a lot about this lesser peace. What are the signs? What will be accomplished during the lesser peace? So I want to actually look at that list. She comes up with 14 things. Wow, they're very. So this is saying we're right now in this formative age, or a great transition from a world order that emphasized sovereign nations and imperial rule. Okay, so empires and nations without any special obligation to each other. Okay, from that to a world community where there is a world order and consultative global governance. That's the transition we're in. How long will that take? Some people say we could get there in 30 years. All we'd need is a World War III that would inspire us to really create a global government that worked and arrange for collective security, et cetera. Some people say it'll take two more centuries or more. But Wendy Woman, so this is the middle of page 10. She says, here are some of the things going on right now in this great transition for humanity. Diminishing instances of religious fanaticism and racial animosity. So when we start to see that diminish, that will be a good sign. Fixing the boundaries of all nations, clarifying the principles of international relations, reviewing and adjusting international agreements, progress toward a single code of international law, a single code. So the body of international law, like we were describing 2 weeks ago, would build up to the point where we have a single body of international law. She says an increasing number of nations ceding claims to maintain arms. Wow, wouldn't that be great? A lot of nations start saying, we don't need any arms other than our own internal affairs. So we're not building up arms for aggression or war. Limiting the size of armaments, combining the armed forces from federated units to serve the whole world, an increasing number of nations ceding certain rights to impose taxes, implying that there's an international tax being developed. Removal of economic barriers, that is to say, no tariffs. What else? Greater interdependence of capital and labor. Capital and labor learn to get along better and not need to strike so much. Nationalism gradually being transmuted into consciousness of world citizenship, and each nation coming to reign in honor within the international community. So she's trying to describe some developments that need to occur in today's world to lead us to this thing called the lesser peace. And the most great peace in the Baha'i concept would be when we've internalized divine guidance and would act like Tani was describing earlier. We almost wouldn't need to be told what to do, or limited anyway, because we'd become children of God in the true sense. Okay. And at the very bottom, I just want to read one comment about the world commonwealth. That's a term that's used a lot in Baha'i writings, the world commonwealth. So it's described this way. According to Baha'i teachings, it will consist of a world legislature whose members will, as the trustees of the whole of mankind, enact such laws as shall be required to regulate the life, satisfy the needs, and adjust the relationships of all races and peoples. A world legislature. A world executive backed by an international force will carry out the decisions arrived at and will safeguard the organic unity of the whole Commonwealth. A world tribunal will adjudicate and deliver its compulsory and final verdict in all and any disputes that may arise between the various elements constituting this universal system. This is a description, I think, of the lesser peace, where there would have to be a force, an armed force that could implement the decisions of a global executive. And then we'll evolve beyond that to the most great peace, according to Baha'i writings. Okay, friends, that's I'm hoping that stirred up a few more other comments, questions, observations, comparisons. Yeah, Baxter, please.
Yeah, question, if I may, please, Harold.
Please.
It's my understanding that they're one of the foundational laws of the Kitabi is the injunction on us to be obedient and respectful of just government.
Oh, yes.
And
Same.
my question to you is, what is your understanding of the concept of what constitutes a just government, please? Thank you.
That's why I was bringing up constructive resilience. Constructive resilience is a response to, say, an unjust government. What are we asked to do? And I'm not saying it's easy to explain that, but I think constructive resilience is the answer. You are supposed to politely complain. You're supposed to politely remind a government that it's not following the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. If you look at how Baha'u'llah did this, Baha'u'llah called out injustice, but he did so in a very dignified way. So that's my understanding of this, that, there is oppression, there is tyranny, right? It needs to be named, but done in a way that doesn't diminish the personhood of those in charge, right? So this is what I like about what I call restorative justice. Restorative justice, we'll look at that in detail next week. And luckily we have Rachel with us because she's had some experience with restorative justice. But you preserve the dignity of the people involved. The one who causes harm is not evil, but their act, you might say, is evil, but not them, right? So I that's my understanding. The Baha'i faith is a restorative justice model in a way, saying that you call out injustice in a dignified way that can be solved at a higher level, right? Rather than, I don't think it's different than Jesus saying, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to render unto God what is God's. So you act in a moral, spiritual way, even serving your enemy, but not letting your enemy think that the oppression is not noticed or not felt, right? Rachel, please, your hand is up. Excellent. Please, sorry.
Yeah, I just had a question about somebody gave a presentation to my class recently on the Baha'i faith, and they weren't Baha'i, and they used a quote saying that men are men and women are women from Baha'u'llah. And so I'm just curious, like, you mentioned gender equality, but what is the general position on LGBTQ rights? And
You know, I'm glad we have other Baha'is here. This is one of the vexing issues, I think, because there's some writings that sort of say something like that homosexuality, for example, is something like a spiritual affliction, right?
Mm.
It doesn't say they're evil. It also says we're not allowed to be prejudiced against anyone.
Mhm.
Also, transgender. I think the highest order Baha'i response is human beings are human beings. The divine itself has no gender. The divine is transgender. We're
Mm.
supposed to treat people with dignity and respect. Anyway, but I think all this is very difficult for
Mhm.
Baha'is and challenging, and we're going through the same, kind of process of discernment as everyone else. Other comments on this, Bill or back? Yeah, Bill, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I would, it doesn't answer all of Rachel's
Right.
questions, but one of the things that's, I think, not commonly understood is that biologically, not all people fall into one gender or the other. There's a small percentage of people in which it's, for lack of better terms, an indeterminate gender. So that in relation to the Baha'i teachings, we're supposed to follow
Science.
science. So we in those cases, obviously, the any writings regarding gender have to be understood as not applying to everyone, but instead of sort of expressing responsibilities, say within a family or a personal context. Not that they're usually, most of them are not absolute laws, but just suggesting roles and recognize that there is the possibility that those guidelines don't apply to everyone's situations.
I'm really glad you shared this, Bill. Thank you. Okay, Tani or Nive, please.
Yeah, well, one quote that comes to mind from the writings about homosexuality or loving another person of the same sex, Baha'u'llah says that all love is fine, and it's very possible to love another human being who happens to be the same gender. But he does tell us that that love should not be expressed in sex. So he sees the the purpose of human copulation as being different. But there's nothing in the writings that say that if somebody does love another person and does express it in sex, then that their rights should be taken away. I in the Kitabi Iqdas, it doesn't say that those people should be punished. It doesn't say their rights should be taken away. But I think a lot of spiritual laws, they make more sense when we have a better sense of our spiritual nature. The fact that we all have both, um, male and female like parts, genes in us. And, when in Islam, when it says that we created you all men and women, but then we have both parts in us. And in Hinduism, it goes even further and it shows that, you're kind of half and half. And so you should, the gender qualities of being masculine and feminine, we all have that. And we need to balance those within ourselves to be able to, I don't know, to maybe meet the challenges of society and feel whole within ourselves too. So I a lot of times when only one position or one side is expressed and we don't consider what the other side is, we in both cases. Like if people who are promoting equality, and I'm all for equality of rights for people who, no matter what they are doing in their bedroom. But if we don't consider what is the reason for Baha'u'llah's law, we also might miss an insight into what he's telling us about our human nature and about our spiritual nature. So just, I think, need to be contemplative.
Thank you. You see, this is a very rich and nuanced discussion. I'm also remembering there are many quotes that talk about so-called feminine qualities as being utterly essential in today's world, especially in the peacemaking realm. For example, the ability to nurture, the ability to receive ideas, the intuitive sense of human relationships. Women are said to have a head start. I'm using my own vernacular for this. It's sort of saying women are almost in a better position to be peacemakers because of that. And so feminine qualities, which have been devalued in the past, are now going to become more important. And to fit with what Tani is saying, we need to blend all these qualities. And you could say someone who's transgender is in a sense really blending them, right? So in a sense, that's like it could be a model. We need to blend all these qualities, but especially the receptive, nurturing, relational skills, you might say, that women are strong in, are now becoming more important. Okay, Baxter, another hand, and then we probably should wrap it up. Yeah, Baxter. Yeah.
Thank you, Harold. I apologize for speaking up so often here.
All right.
I have had a personal interaction with this question, and what I came away with was that, well, first of all, that God is not subject to current social fascinations. I think man is subject to God. But to go beyond that, I have muscular dystrophy. That's a genetic illness, and I have that. When God talks about man, capital M,
Yeah.
he's speaking about the ideal concept of man. So strip muscular dystrophy out of that ideal. So personally, I am not ideal. Yet nobody has ever suggested I be burnt at the stake or rejected from God's religion because I am not of the perfect ideal structure. Now, this is, if I was to make my muscular dystrophy the focus and defining feature of who I am, that would be so shallow. There's so much more to me than just that. That's not my defining feature. That's just a coincidental thing. And I think the same thing with other genetic illnesses. Someone who's born hermaphroditic, or someone who has inclinations other than the ideal inclination, these are just aberrations of their own individuality. These are not the ideal man. Now, in the personal interaction I had with this question, there was a gentleman who wanted to join the Baha'i community that I was a part of, and he announced himself to be a proud gay man. And so we studied together the question, and we concluded, like I said, that that's not the defining feature of your qualification. It does not disqualify you from joining the community. If I am heterosexual and I am sleeping with every woman I can get to, that should be sanctioned. I should be sanctioned for that. If I'm heterosexual and I just accept God's law and just live by it, then it shouldn't matter what my sexual proclivity is. It
Yeah,
shouldn't
I get
matter.
what you're saying.
And so in the end, this gentleman did join the community, and what's wrong with having somebody? Everybody has something. I have muscular dystrophy. He has a proclivity for men. Okay, we're not going to burn him at the stake for it. We're not going to sanction him for it. But by the same token, God has given us laws. Live by the laws, and it shouldn't make any difference. I
Very
guess
good.
that's how we concluded that. I'll
Yeah.
leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, one more comment, Bill, and then we can call it a day. See you 2
Well,
weeks from now. Yeah. Okay.
it just occurred to me as we were discussing this issue that we use the term something like transgender, transsexual. I think that doesn't even represent a full exploration of the possibility. That we have to consider the possibilities that for some people there's maybe not a proclivity towards either type of what we consider male or female, and that this is such a complex area that there's not really a common understanding that we can very easily come to until we, I think, very sincerely consultative, properly taking generations to view and discuss these issues.
Very good point. Yeah. So we're binary in our thinking, and our language is kind of klutzy, isn't it? Right?
Yes.
To try to name where we are along some kind of a very complex continuum. Wow. Okay. I didn't know we were going to get to these things. All right. Thank you so much, friends. So next session is about the future and looking at environmental considerations too. It looks like, justice is going to apply to the earth, right, in the future, as well as to human relations and international relations and that sort of thing. And, and Bill had mentioned a book on humankind. There's 4
Yes.
little mini book reviews in the session for 2 weeks from now. So basically, we're looking at future concepts of justice, and including restorative justice. So we desperately have to have you, Rachel, next time. Not
Yeah.
Kathy. We want you because you have some specific experience with this. Also, it's restorative justice people that are sponsoring this same course up in Comox. So I'm really going to learn a lot from them. I think justice is evolving, right? That's kind of the nature of this whole course to show us that it has evolved and it will continue to evolve. And we might learn a lot from indigenous people about justice, right? The circle process of justice looking like the goal is to restore, not to punish, to bring us back to where we were before the harm, or even go further, right? To bring about advancement of the human community. Okay, thanks everyone. All right, I'll see you in 2 weeks.